When you decide a building just isn't working for you anymore, your first instinct is usually renovation.
Right. Yeah, like fixing what's already there.
Exactly. You think maybe we knock down a non-load-bearing wall or, throw on a fresh coat of paint, bring in some modern furniture to make the space feel more livable.
Just tweaking the existing structure.
Yeah, exactly. But the blueprint we're unpacking today, it isn't interested in renovation at all. It's calling for a complete, down-to-the-studs demolition of the foundation itself.
It really is. I mean, the author is mapping out an absolute foundational teardown and rebuild of global society.
Like, it's huge.
Massive. So we're looking at a text titled The Architecture of the Divine Feminine and Matriarchal Balance, and it basically outlines this impending transition from fear-based patriarchal hierarchies to, well, a state of balanced matriarchal equilibrium.
And before we get into the weeds on this, I really want to clarify our mission for you, our listener.
Yeah, that's an important caveat.
Right, because this source material, it touches on some deeply entrenched socio-political, cultural, and spiritual themes. And our goal in this deep dive is not to take a side.
No, definitely.
We certainly aren't here to endorse these viewpoints, left or right. We are simply acting as your guides, to decode the very specific, fascinating arguments the author is presenting.
So you can evaluate the architecture of these ideas for yourself.
Exactly. We're mapping the territory.
We're not telling you where to settle.
Yeah, nicely put.
What's fascinating here is how the author immediately redefines this concept of the divine feminine. Because, if you spend any time in pop spirituality spaces, that term...
Oh, it's everywhere.
Right. It gets thrown around as this vague, feel-good buzzword, like a kind of aesthetic.
Yeah, like pastel colors and crystals.
Exactly. But this source anchors the concept in undeniable physical reality. It frames the divine feminine not as a buzzword, but as an absolute biological catalyst for global systemic change.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because defining global change through biology is a massive and somewhat controversial claim.
It is.
The document opens by defining this force as the foundational magic of the mother. But it doesn't leave that in the ethereal spiritual realm, does it?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It points to very specific, undeniable bodily functions as literal proof of this magic.
Right.
The author grounds the entire premise in two profound capacities: the ability of the female body to bleed regularly without dying, and the literal ability to transform a seed into human life.
Which is wild when you think about it.
It is. And modern society often medicalizes these functions, treating them as mundane clinical events or, honestly, even inconveniences.
Oh, absolutely. Like a biological tax you just have to pay.
Right. But the text is demanding we elevate them back to their ancient status as the ultimate literal forces of creation on this planet.
It's treating the female body almost like an advanced piece of alchemy. It's saying, look, this isn't just the mechanical process of giving birth. It's treating this biological reality as an undeniable, earth-aligned force.
Exactly.
We're talking about the actual engine of creation being housed in human form.
And positioning this life-giving capacity as the foundational power of the natural world, well, it establishes a logical absolute for the author's argument.
How so?
Well, if the feminine body is the engine of human creation, then any systemic structure that stands against this force or, tries to suppress it is inherently destructive to life itself.
Ah, I see.
The author argues that suppressing the very mechanism that sustains humanity is not just violent, it's ultimately futile. I mean, you can't declare war on the root system and expect the tree to survive.
Right. But if this biological magic is as undeniable and foundational as the author claims, there's a massive contradiction we have to address here.
The current state of the world.
Yeah. Why does our current society look nothing like this? I mean, if you look out the window, we aren't exactly operating in an earth-aligned, mother-revering utopia.
Not exactly, no. And the document explains this disconnect through what it calls the anatomy of patriarchal erasure.
Okay.
The text asserts that, historically, the feminine was the very first colonized demographic, and the author uses that specific word to imply a hostile, strategic takeover of a pre-existing organic structure.
The word colonization definitely implies intent. Like it's not an accidental drift away from reverence.
No, it's deliberate. It's a deliberate subjugation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The current global power structure, which the source defines as patriarchy, is described as a system that operates almost entirely on the currency of fear and control.
Right.
It uses those tools to enforce what the author visualizes as a ladder-like hierarchy. Think of how a ladder functions in physical space.
It's linear.
Right. Linear, vertical, and incredibly precarious. Someone is always forced to be above you, and someone is always pushed below you.
Oh, wow. So the source argues that abandoning that ancient reverence for the mother in favor of this distorted, fear-based ladder that is the direct cause of our systems of oppression, manufactured scarcity, and pervasive global violence.
I have to push back on the mechanics of this colonization, though.
Sure.
Because I struggle to understand how a system successfully erases something so fundamental. It's like trying to pretend gravity doesn't exist just because you're afraid of falling.
Right. It seems impossible.
Yeah. How do you successfully scrub the engine of creation from the center of human society for thousands of years?
Well, the text argues the erasure wasn't an oversight. It was a deeply strategic necessity for the latter to survive.
Because the ladder is fragile.
Yes. A system built entirely on precarious vertical control is inherently fragile. It has to destroy or subjugate anything that operates on a different, more organic frequency.
Oh, okay.
Because if your entire power structure relies on manufacturing fear and extracting value, you just can't afford to have your population revering an earth-aligned, freely giving power of creation.
They're incompatible.
Totally incompatible. The latter had to write the feminine out of the history books to maintain its own illusion of supremacy. It had to make the dominant, life-giving force look like a subordinate, dependent one.
So the latter essentially had to launch this massive PR campaign against biology.
Basically,
Just to convince people that the vertical climb was the only way to survive.
And that campaign required physical enforcement, not just narrative shifts. It required removing women from positions of spiritual and economic authority, restricting bodily autonomy, and centralizing power into institutions that only rewarded aggressive climbing.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because if we accept the source's premise that this patriarchal ladder is broken, destructive, and built on an illusion, we logically have to look at the alternative.
The rebuild.
Right. If we take a sledgehammer to the ladder, what exactly are we putting in its place?
Well, first, we have to dismantle a very common cultural misconception. Because when most people hear the word matriarchy, they view it entirely through the only lens they've ever known.
The patriarchal lens.
Exactly. They assume matriarchy is just an inverted hierarchy.
Right. People hear matriarchy and usually picture a corporate boardroom where the CEO is suddenly a woman barking the exact same orders at a room full of men.
Yes.
We tend to think we're just, swapping the gender of the person holding the whip.
But the source document insists that assumption is entirely false. True matriarchy, as defined by this text, is not an inverted ladder.
What is it then?
It operates as a circle or a web. It completely removes the concept of subjugation from society.
So we aren't just changing the CEO. We're replacing the corporate ladder entirely with a round table.
Precisely.
But mechanically, how does a web actually govern a complex global society better than a ladder?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author argues that the web is the highest and most resilient form of societal organization. And that's because it mirrors the natural balance found throughout all biological ecosystems.
Okay, I can see that.
Right. In a web, every node is connected, and every strand relies on the integrity of the others. It represents a society existing in dynamic equilibrium.
Unlike the ladder.
Exactly. In a web, if you damage one strand, the entire structure registers the impact and compensates to hold the tension. But in a ladder, if you kick out the rung below you to secure your own position, you might feel safe temporarily.
Until you realize you've completely isolated yourself.
Yes, and compromise the integrity of the whole climb.
So a web relies on tension, distribution, and connection to hold together, whereas a ladder just relies on gravity pulling everything downward.
That's a great way to put it.
The goal of the matriarchal web isn't to get revenge on the people who used to be at the top. It's the complete elimination of subjugation as an organizing principle.
The web prioritizes sustainability over extraction. It recognizes that hoarding resources at a single apex point eventually starves the foundational roots, which, well, kills the entire system.
Okay, I love the theory. The blueprint looks great on paper, but practically speaking, how does humanity coordinate a shift of this magnitude? I mean, you and I both know you can't just send out a global calendar invite to 8 billion people asking them to get off the ladder and start spinning a web.
Right, that would be convenient.
So what is the mechanism for this transition?
Well, the text introduces a deeply resonant cultural concept to explain this. It points to the Navajo, or Dine, concept of Haseya.
Haseya.
Yes. Literally translated, it means she rises, or to rise up. Traditionally, it's a symbol of profound individual strength, healing, and empowerment. But the document applies it to this paradigm shift by emphasizing its collective power.
Okay.
In this context, it's less about she rises as a solitary hero and more about we rise as a unified global force. It represents the organic, synchronized unification of women across the world.
That makes me think of a murmuration of starlings.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Have you ever watched thousands of individual birds moving together in the sky?
Yeah, it's mesmerizing.
There's no single bird at the front yelling directions through a megaphone. They all just move in this perfect synchronized fluidity because they are all sensing and reacting to the same subtle shifts in the wind and the movements of their neighbors.
And that organic synchronization is central to the author's vision. It's an alignment based on intuition and shared reality, rather than a mandated alignment enforced by a central authority figure.
But I have to ask about the reality of human nature here.
Sure.
A flock of birds is one thing, but women across the globe are incredibly diverse.
Very true.
We're talking about vastly different cultures, economic realities, political beliefs, and lived experiences. How does a concept like Haseya overcome those massive, very real individual divides to actually create a unified web?
The author asserts that the unifying force isn't found in having identical cultures or opinions or backgrounds. The unifying force is the collective recognition of the broken ladder. The text frames this movement under the banner of women and children versus everybody.
Wow, that sounds intense.
It does sound intense, but it signifies that the shared experience of surviving under a destructive, fear-based system creates a universal baseline of resilience.
Oh, okay, I think I'm following.
The sheer exhaustion of trying to climb a ladder that is actively designed to push you down becomes the great equalizer.
So the pain of navigating the old system basically becomes the catalyst for building the new one.
Exactly.
The shared burnout of, carrying the mental load, navigating systemic disparities, and watching resources be extracted. That is what finally convinces everyone to stop climbing and start weaving.
The shared necessity for survival creates the glue of the matriarchal web. The women are uniting to lift one another out of a paradigm that fundamentally wasn't built to sustain them.
This naturally brings us to a massive question regarding the other half of the population.
The men.
Right. If women are organically uniting through Haseya to weave this circular web, what happens to the men? Where do they fit into a society that has entirely dismantled the vertical ladder they were historically conditioned to climb?
The source narrative progresses to a phase it calls the great sifting of masculine archetypes.
The great sifting.
Yes. And this is described as a period of intense, necessary systemic friction. As the feminine unifies and begins to construct the web, the masculine is forced to make a definitive choice regarding its relationship to power.
Okay.
Men must either align with this expansive horizontal power, or they'll find themselves actively standing against it. The text is quite stark in its assessment, actually.
How so?
It says those who refuse to adapt, who cling desperately to the patriarchal ladder and oppose the unification of the web, they're labeled as enemies to life itself.
So what does this all mean for the listener trying to process this? Because the source uses language that sounds incredibly absolute.
It does.
It sounds almost like a cosmic sorting hat, like a zero-sum game. You're either with the web or you're an enemy of life. In a practical day-to-day sense, how does a man actually align with the web without losing his identity?
Well, it might help to view the great sifting not as a personal condemnation of individual men, but as an immune system response.
An immune response. Interesting.
Yeah. The web is actively rejecting cells that do not contribute to the health of the whole body. The document argues that our current global ladder is dominated by corrupted, parasitic masculine archetypes.
Like what?
Think of the leader who extracts all the value from his team while taking all the credit, or the conqueror who uses aggression purely to maintain control and hoard resources.
Right, the archetypes that thrive on subjugation.
Exactly. And to achieve matriarchal balance, the source demands that society categorically reject those parasitic behaviors. Instead, men are called to elevate noble, protective, and grounding masculine archetypes.
So it's about the archetype's relationship to power.
Spot on. A parasitic archetype tries to conquer and possess the divine feminine. But a noble archetype is capable of standing alongside the web, providing structural integrity, protection, and support without ever demanding subjugation in return.
So it's asking for a fundamental upgrade in how we define masculine success. It's moving away from how much can I conquer and control to how much stability and protection can I offer the community,
Exactly.
because the web absolutely still needs healthy masculine energy to maintain its equilibrium and tension, just as much as it needs the feminine.
The web requires both energies and balance, but it simply cannot survive parasitic extraction. Therefore, the great sifting is the process of starving out the parasitic archetypes until only the noble, collaborative ones remain.
That makes a lot of systemic sense.
It does.
But, just as we are getting fully immersed in these sweeping, high-level philosophical concepts like archetypes, global shifts, the restructuring of power, the source document takes a really sharp, unexpected turn.
Oh, yes. The final prerequisite.
Right. It yanks us out of the philosophical clouds and grounds us right in the literal physical body.
The text presents a strict, non-negotiable final requirement for this societal evolution to actually take hold, and it all boils down to the complete unreserved normalization of adult female biology.
It's like we've been analyzing this grand spiritual blueprint for a new society, admiring the roof and the structural layout. And the author suddenly stops the tour and insists you cannot build this house until you stop being grossed out by the raw materials.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. The source states that moving forward into this balanced equilibrium, there must be an absolute rejection of any partnerships, cultural norms, or societal systems that express disgust toward the natural baseline realities of the female form.
It specifically calls out things like body hair and menstruation.
Yes, it does.
And in the context of a global paradigm shift, focusing on body hair and menstrual blood might seem to some people like an incredibly mundane or, I don't know, strangely specific detail.
Sure, it might seem small compared to global economics.
Right. So why is physical biology acting as the final, ultimate gatekeeper to a massive spiritual and systemic shift?
This raises a critical point about how we internalize systemic hatred. The author is pointing out a profound hypocrisy in our current culture.
Hypocrisy how?
Well, society cannot claim to revere the magic of the mother or celebrate the divine feminine while simultaneously shaming, sanitizing, or expressing disgust at the very biological processes that make that magic possible.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You cannot truly respect, honor, or participate in a matriarchal system if you are deeply offended by its literal natural reality.
So if a culture requires women to shave, hide, or artificially alter their baseline physical reality just to be considered clean or acceptable,
Yeah,
that culture is still entirely operating on the latter.
exactly. It is still demanding that the feminine conform to a distorted, externally imposed standard of what is proper.
It's demanding subjugation of the body.
Yes. True acceptance of the female body in its natural state is the ultimate litmus test for the great sifting. If you flinch at the physical reality of the divine feminine, you are demonstrating that you aren't ready for the spiritual reality of the web.
That makes total sense.
Accepting these biological truths isn't just a peripheral feminist talking point in this document. It is the foundational prerequisite for participating in the balanced systems being ushered in. I mean, you simply cannot enter the circle if you despise the material it's made of.
That is a staggering perspective. It demands a level of internal auditing that goes way beyond just, changing how we vote or how we structure our companies.
It's deeply personal.
It really is. And it brings this entire deep dive full circle. Let's synthesize the journey we've just been on because we have covered some incredibly dense terrain today.
We definitely have. We started by looking at the pure biological alchemy of creating life, recognizing that the magic of the mother is framed not as a metaphor, but as the literal earth-aligned engine of creation.
Right. And we examined how that engine was systematically colonized and erased by the patriarchal ladder, a structure built entirely on fear, extraction, and vertical hierarchy.
And we saw how the proposed solution isn't just flipping the ladder upside down so someone else can be oppressed.
Right, replacing it entirely with a circular web of dynamic equilibrium.
Yes. Then we explored the mechanism of that transition through Haseya, the collective, organic rising of women united not by sameness, but by the shared resilience forged under a broken system.
Then we navigated the great sifting, where men are challenged to abandon parasitic, extracting behaviors and step into noble, collaborative roles alongside the feminine.
And finally, we brought it all back to the bricks and mortar, the radical, non-negotiable acceptance of the female body as the ultimate proof of readiness for this new society.
It is a comprehensive, biologically rooted vision of a world fundamentally realigned.
It certainly gives you lots to think about.
It does. And as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to turn this directly to you, our listener. As you navigate your week, I challenge you to look at the structures operating in your own life. Look at your workplace, your community organizations, even the dynamics within your own family and relationships.
Are they ladders or webs?
Exactly. Ask yourself, are these spaces functioning as ladders, relying on fear, control, and establishing who is above whom? Or are they operating as webs, prioritizing connection, shared resilience, and mutual support?
Applying that lens can radically change how you interpret almost every interaction you have.
It really does. And I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over, something that pushes the boundaries of the source material even further.
Okay, I'm listening.
We talk about how the patriarchal ladder relies heavily on controlling recorded history to enforce its hierarchy.
Right,
Ladders need ledgers.
they do.
They need a paper trail to prove who conquered whom, who holds the debt, and who belongs at the top.
The documentation of dominance is crucial for a vertical hierarchy.
But if the matriarchal web is truly based on the natural, ongoing cycles of life, on the organic alchemy of creation and dynamic equilibrium, does a true matriarchal society even need to excessively record its history in that same rigid way?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Right. Or, if you tear down the concrete building and let the forest reclaim the land, is the ultimate proof of the web's success simply found in its quiet, continuous survival?
Wow.
Think about it. We'll see you on the next deep dive.